Hello and welcome to the Hooligan Report for another week. I'm joined by Bojan
Hi guys.
and also by Loonerty.
Hello.
And we'll preview the fixtures for the first week of the Premier League season, but we'll start with a bit of discussion about a couple of sides we've yet to discuss over the pre-season. We'll start with Manchester United, who've had a bit of a change over the off-season. Would you say, Bojan, with Mourinho coming into the club and a couple of new signings?
Lots of change, mate. Lots of change and change for the better. If you remember my rants last year about Van Gaal. We finally had a manager who's come in who's been very decisive about what he wants. And we've seen four very high caliber players join the club. So it's a really exciting time for us with players like Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Paul Pogba, Henrik Mkhitaryan, and Eric Bailey joining. So I couldn't really be happier with our summer.
What sort of impact do you expect from someone like Ibrahimovic at his age? Do you think he'll be able to just continue his form from last season, or do you expect that there will be some sort of drop off?
It's far too hard to say with any conviction, mate. I mean, if his performance against Leicester in the Charity Shield is anything to go by, and I think that is probably what the way that he will perform this season. He won't do much outside of the box. He hasn't got his pace anymore, but if you give him chances, he'll put them away. He's very clinical. You saw him in the Charity Shield. He out-jumped and out-strength Wes Morgan, which is not the easiest thing to do, and buried really the one chance he had for the game. But I think his impact will also be felt pretty heavily off the field as well. We haven't had a real leader in the dressing room since Nemanja Vidic and Patrice Evra left the club a few years ago. So that we actually got someone who'll bring that confidence and some would say arrogance that's also brought with Jose Mourinho.
Lunedy, obviously, Mourinho was your manager for a chunk of last season and the seasons before that. What's your take on him going to United, and do you think he'll be a success?
Yeah, I think he'll be a success wherever he goes. Basically, I think it was a mistake to get rid of him when we did, because it was more the players than him, in my view. But of course, you could say that it's his methods that result in the players being like that. So I don't think there's any doubt that for at least the first two seasons he'll be good. It's just whether United players can stand him for much longer than that
Well,
will be the question.
he's only got a 3-year deal, doesn't he, Bojan? So perhaps it's not likely he'll see an extension to that deal.
Well, there was talk about a month ago that United were considering extending it, but they haven't done so far, which is good. I mean, I've done a bit of research, further research on him now that he's managing my club, and there seems to be, I guess, a fairly clear pattern with him. The first year, he either wins the league or is pretty close. The second year, he wins the league wherever he goes. And then the third year is that there's that massive drop off. There is another, I guess, correlation there too. Last year, he really wanted Chelsea to buy Paul Pogba, and he wanted Chelsea to buy some other big stars. He had a big falling out with the director of football, Emanalo. They didn't really sign anyone outside of, well, Falcao, if I can
And Pedro once the season
recall.
started, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So I think, I mean, under his methods, they're fairly intense, and I think players get over that after 2 or 3 years. I mean, even Didier Drogba in his autobiography alluded to that. Whilst he loved working with Mourinho, by the third year they were kind of all burnt out. So for Mourinho to work, there does need to be a turnover of players. Not I'm talking the whole team, but a certain number of players every few years needs to be turned over.
And then in terms of player relationships, Ibra's taken the number 9 off Martial, who's now I think number 11. And then obviously as well, Juan Mata, who had troubles with Mourinho at Chelsea as well. Is there any sort of truth in the fact that either of them might have been a bit offside, put a bit offside by Mourinho?
Oh, I'm not. I don't think by Mourinho per se. I think there quite clearly has been a lack of communication between the club and Martial, especially considering that I think he'd either just had done or was just about to release a clothing line in France called AM9.
I think
So
he
that
had
probably
just done it.
wasn't the greatest timing. So there should have been greater communication there on that. So, but I don't think there's a rift at all between Martial and Mourinho, and I think he's going to have a massive season considering he's going to have players such as Paul Pogba and Luke Shaw going down the left-hand side. So he should get plenty of space and not have the double teams he had last year. And with regards to Juan Mata, who knows, mate? I mean, that's really that relationship. I think is a lot more complex than people think. I don't think it's quite as clear cut. He's got the ability, and I've said this kind of ever since I've come on the podcast and come on the board. My motto: there's no doubting his talent. The doubt is his physicality and his speed, and I'm just not sure how he's going to fit into a Mourinho side. I mean, do you think that's a fair call, Loonerty?
Yeah, absolutely. It didn't work 2.5 years ago with Chelsea. I can't see him staying long now, being older, with United. I think probably by January, again, he'll be off.
Do we think he might head back to Spain?
I think that's most likely. I think Valencia are interested in getting him back, from what I've seen. But
Well, if Valencia, it looks like they're trying to sell, being enticed to sell Mustafi to Arsenal for £30 million and potentially Abdenor, their other centre half, which is kind of a strange move, selling both the centre halves before the season starts. But Jorge Mendes runs that club, so who knows what happens there. But there's not a lot of money, as we all know, in Spain outside of the big three there. But Valencia is one club that's bankrolled by a billionaire, and they're looking like they're going to sell one of their best players. That would make sense for both the player and also Valencia. The other place I could see him go and fit in would be in Serie A, but I'd have doubts looking at the way that Italian clubs approach their purchases. I'd have significant doubts that United would want to deal in being paid £25 million in 25 instalments over 25 years.
The other Manchester clubs also had quite a bit of a spending spree this summer, with Manchester City appointing Pep Guardiola as their new manager, and they've splashed out the cash on players such as John Stones for about £47.5 million, Nolito for 13 or £14 million, Gundogan for about £20 million, and several other players as well. Bojan, do you think Guardiola's the man for City who can bring them sort of that sustained success, or do you think he's also a shorter term appointment?
Well, he's certainly. I mean, I think that question will be answered in two ways. He won't be there more than 3 years because he's nowhere more than 3 years. In the same, although he often leaves under different circumstances to Mourinho. But yeah, I don't see him being a long-term solution because there's no track record to go on to say he'll be there for more than 3 years. But the reason he gets hired and people want him so much is because they talk about the legacy that he leaves at clubs and the way that he improves players. So I think although he'll be a short-term appointment, he will leave a lasting legacy that's felt for years there.
And Lunedy, obviously, City have managed to buy John Stones, who you were linked with pretty heavily last summer. Are you disappointed in not getting Stones, or have you has Chelsea sort of moved on to obviously targeting Koulibaly this summer?
I'm not too disappointed because I don't think he's worth that much money. And we obviously weren't willing to pay it last season. And he didn't have a great year. So I'm fine with us not spending nearly 50 million for him. And it does, you're right, it does seem like we've moved on to trying to get Koulibaly, but it's going to be for about the same amount of money regardless. So we'll just see what happens, I suppose. I
Do
think
you
he'll
find
probably.
it interesting? Sorry. Do you find it interesting that Conte's turned up at Chelsea, and after you were linked so heavily with John Stones last year, but I haven't heard of any Chelsea interest in John Stones, and it's all been towards those, I guess, more pure defenders as opposed to ball playing centre halves.
Yeah, I suppose so. I suppose. I guess he wants his defenders to be more defensive than what Guardiola plans to have with Stones. And because there's been, as you said, like almost no talk that we've been looking at Stones this summer, compared to the huge ordeal last year. Yeah.
Well, just on City before we move on to Chelsea, how do we see how do we see Stones gelling in that defensive partnership, perhaps with Company, or will it be three at the back as Guardiola's played in some places, or how do we see them lining up?
Um, I I think it'd be madness for them to start it with three at the back right now. I think that's what he'll eventually go to, but I don't think they have the players to play that formation yet. And I think I guess, to stop them leaking too many goals early in the season, they're better off playing a back four. They still have two very capable fullbacks in Sanya and Clichy, and they have two capable centre halves, potentially three centre halves in Company if he's fit, Stones and Otamendi. Looks like Denier's going to be going out on loan or being sold. He's pretty unhappy about not being given an opportunity. Mandala looks to be on his way as well. So I still think there's a potential further defensive signing at Man City personally, unless he's going to play one centre half and two fullbacks at the back. But that would be, I think, it would be suicide for them.
And then finally, Loonerty, I'll ask you as a neutral. Who do you see finishing higher on the table out of United and City?
I think it'll probably be City. I feel like it might take a bit for United to get used to Mourinho and have the players gel with his ideas. Whereas Guardiola, I think City already has the players ready to go for that, and I think they'll just be able to back it up a lot easier than United climbing a few spots.
What's your take on that, Bojan?
Jesus, I'd say CJ opposite, and
Okay.
I'd argue very strongly that Jose Mourinho knows this league inside out. He spent the last 6 months on the sidelines scouting not only the opposition teams in the Premier League, potential signings and how they'll integrate, and also Manchester United. He knows all the players inside out now. He knows all the signings that they've made inside out. I mean, he was scouting Henrik Mkhitaryan in Dortmund with Rui Faria 2 weeks after he was sacked. He already knew he had the job at United. So he's been planning for this for some time. So outside of maybe struggling to integrate initially because of the Euros, the problem that every manager has in the league, or every manager in the top half, SM, there's not. I think that's gonna affect everyone across the board. I don't think there are too many players within Man City who are capable of playing the system that Guardiola wants. I also think there's a lot of players without Man City who know that they're not first choice and who know that they're just waiting until Guardiola finds someone to replace them, such as Joe Hart. It is quite clear to anyone that he's a dead man walking as soon as they can convince Claudio Bravo or Ter Stegen to move. So I think that, particularly in the first year, and I've been quite consistent in saying this, I think in the first year Mourinho will do very well. And I think that Guardiola's second season, which is when you'll see the real Man City, because that team that he inherited to the team that he'll want, they're still a long way apart.
Well, another club that's had a new manager come in this summer is Chelsea, so we'll move on to chat about them now with you, Loonerty. Um, do you see Conte as significantly changing Chelsea's style in this off-season?
Yeah, I have noticed in the preseason we've been a bit more attacking than we have been in the last few seasons with Mourinho. We don't for as much get to the opponent's box and just dink the ball around looking for a way in. It's been a lot more direct. But I've seen the defense suffer. I think we've only had like 1 or 2 clean sheets over the preseason. And I mean, that's partly to do with the fact that we don't have great defenders at the moment and we do need to buy more. But yeah, I think the style will definitely change.
Do you find it concerning about your lack of signings so far? I mean, you've brought in Batshuayi for about 33 million and Kante for 32 million, but that seems to have been your only business so far of any note.
Yeah, it is. I think we still need 2 defenders. We need a fullback to piss Ivanovic off. So we've had Ola Aina playing a fair bit in preseason, and he's looked alright, but he's nowhere near ready for a starter. So we definitely need either a right back and keep Azpilicueta on the left, or a left back and we can move Azpi to the right. But I don't know. All the managers seem to love having Ivanovic playing, so we'll see how that goes. And then definitely a centre back, because Terry's not getting any younger. Cahill, the same thing, and Zuma's still coming off his ACL injury. So really, our centre backs, fit centre backs, are Terry, Cahill, and Ivanovic, which is concerning going into the season.
What would constitute a successful season for Chelsea after last season's pretty disastrous results? Do you see, again, are you back to thinking that nothing short of a top 4 position would be acceptable, or is there a bit more leeway given where the club's sort of coming from, I suppose?
I'd be disappointed if it wasn't a top 4 finish. But, last season was pretty bad, and it might take a little while to get back to where we were. But yeah, I would still be disappointed with anything under 4.
Bojan, did you have any questions about Chelsea?
They need a centre-half like nobody's business. They need it so bad. If they go into the season, if they don't buy a high-quality centre-half before the window closes...
Oh, we're screwed.
I think you'll basically mirror Manchester United's last 2 years. Basically, it'll be dull, drab. Let's try and not concede football because, there's the one team that Conte built at Juve was really built behind a world-class back 4, if not back 5. And out in the Chelsea team, you could say that Azpilicueta's bordering on world-class. He's definitely their best and most consistent defender. Zuma won't be back, I assume, until January at the earliest. So they are wafer thin at the back. And if they don't improve that, it'll be the John Obi Mikel show and probably a back 5 of potatoes and trying to win 1-0.
Well, it's interesting then, as you've sold Djilabodji for about £8 million to Sunderland, that you were willing to sanction the departure of a centre-back.
It's got to be that they have, they're confident that they'll get Koulibaly or Nick Mustafi off Arsenal. If it ends, I mean, even though Djilabodji, he's a bit of a joke for Chelsea fans because of his only having 1 appearance or 2 appearances for us. But it would be ridiculous to decrease what is already our weakest area by selling him.
He's horrible. That's why you're selling him, mate. He's horrible.
I actually heard that he was half decent in Germany.
Sorry?
I heard he was half decent in Germany.
Well, he was the one that Philippe Auclair was talking about. There might have been some illegal shenanigans going on because he thought that, the famous French journalist, he thought that Djilabodji was barely a Liga player, let alone a Premier League caliber player, and that he was worth about €300,000, not whatever Chelsea paid for him. So yeah,
Well,
and
great news for
if
Sunderland.
if what we're saying is correct, and that Conte's come in there, knows he got a shortage at centre half, and is prepared to let him go, I think that pretty much says it all.
Yeah, well, it will be interesting to see how he goes for Sunderland in that case. For £8 million, they'd be wanting a pretty decent player, so we'll see how that pans out for them. I caught up with Fryer Tuck a little bit earlier to chat about Leicester, so let's have a listen to that now. I'm joined now by Fryer Tuck.
Hey guys, how are you?
Good to have you along. Hopefully you've managed to catch your breath after what was a pretty exciting season last season. How did you find it all, just as a bit of a summary?
Honestly, it still feels pretty surreal right now. I mean, Leicester City champions of the Premier League. What happened to this Big Four dominance? Where did all this come from? I mean, it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still pretty hard to wrap your head around it all. So obviously you travel to the KCOM as the defending champions, which is pretty unreal. How do you think you'll go this season? Do you think you'll be able to replicate that sort of success and finish in the top six, or do you think there'll be some sort of drop-off with Champions League football also on the schedule?
Champions League football definitely will play a big part in the early season. I mean, well, it's 6 extra games at the very least. It's still not quite a championship season, mind, but these days, it's at a higher intensity, and especially the fact that you have to travel to grounds. Travel to other countries, as opposed to going to Hull or London, for example. Yeah. I suppose the big one is to figure out what sort of fixtures are around those games. I did take an earlier look and found something rather interesting, actually. Before all of our games in Europe, we play, all of them are away games: Liverpool, United, Chelsea, Tottenham. Watford's the exception, and Sunderland away, but we play Man City after the 6th and final game. And then on the other side, we have most of these are home games: Burnley, Southampton, West Brom, and Middlesbrough. So hard games going into the Champions League games, and easy ones outside of it. So there might be a bit of a gamble that we might take it a bit easier in those harder games. So I do expect perhaps a bit of a drop off there, just to give ourselves a better chance. I think we're going to give Champions League a fair and proper go. I mean, we're going in as the top seed. And the worst that we could possibly face is Atletico Madrid, and as a Leicester fan, it's almost as a given, because the last time we went to Europe, Atletico stopped us. So, yeah, so it seems to be on the cards.
Well, you've made some decent signings with Mendy, Musa, Hernandez, Zila, so you've got some good depth now. Does that mean that you'll rotate the squad quite heavily to cope with this European football?
Oh, we've got so many quality players, but we don't know what to do with them, in all honesty. I think the first thing we're going to do is start off with the team that got us the title last year, and then we introduce our newer players. I expect players like Musa and Mendy to get substitute appearances first up, and then once we get to grasp what our best 11 is exactly, then once the Champions League games come, then we can start strategizing how exactly we're going to rotate these players. I mean, as nice as it is to have Musa and Vardy together at the same time, that's not going to be practical, especially considering both rely on their speed, and you want them as fresh as possible. So there's going to be some interesting strategy, especially in the early part of the season.
And then obviously Kante has departed for Chelsea, and you've had Walsh depart for Everton as well. So how do you see their departures impacting on the side, and I guess who is the bigger impact?
Oof. Well, to be honest, looking at the pre-season games, it's quite clear that we have been missing Conte's influence in the midfield. it just doesn't. You expect him to be there, and obviously it's missing. I mean that Community Shield game, that Lingard goal. I'll tell you one thing: if Conte was there, that goal was never going to happen. And well, it's telling. I have seen some signs in Amati and a little bit from Mendy that they could potentially fulfill that role, but I think they're going to need a bit more time just to see if they can. Jets and I were talking a bit earlier about this. The funny thing is, we might actually see Drinkwater be our Conte, and maybe Mendy takes over Drinkwater's role as that ball-playing midfielder there. So, could be quite interesting to see if what evolves over the season.
And then in terms of Walsh also leaving for Everton, is that going to be more of a long-term impact on the club?
It definitely is going to be a long-term impact because he was responsible for finding these wonderful gems of players that we've helped develop, and unfortunately in Conte's case see along his way. It looks like we might have Tottenham's former director of football coming this way potentially, so that might be and he's got a pretty good track record. He was working with Coman in his Southampton days, so that could be interesting to see how that goes. So, the club has a plan, and hopefully we get the right guys and see the club forward.
And then I guess what would constitute a successful season for you? Obviously, last season was such an unbelievable success for you guys. Would a top 10 finish suffice, or are you kind of aiming a bit higher and perhaps a bit of progression in Champions League?
We either go undefeated back-to-back champions or Ranieri goes out. But I think for us to get for a successful season, I would think a top 4 position would actually be successful per se. I think realistically speaking, we should try to aim between the 5th and 7th and get us a Europa League spot. Satisfactory, I think, would be top 10. Top 10, I think, would be the minimum for that. I mean, we need to step forward and establish ourselves. I mean, no good winning the title if you can't establish something out of it. I mean, Southampton and West Ham have developed some good consistency, and we need to see some consistency from ourselves. Give us something to build on in future seasons.
And then the first building block, of course, comes this Saturday night against Hull in the opening game of the season. No defending champion has ever lost on the opening day of the season. Hull has, I think, it's 12 or 13 fit players, 2 of whom are goalkeepers. The scene is set for a typical sort of typical Leicester sort of performance. 1-0 to Hull, perhaps. At the KCOM. How do you see the game panning out? Do you think you guys are going to run away with it, or it'll be a close one, or what do you think?
Well, in typical Leicester fashion, unfortunately, we have been a bit victim. It's like, everything has gone bad for the opposition. Oh, look, they sacked their manager, and then they win like 1 or 2-0 or something like that. It always is the case. I mean, when Pardew got this, I think when in the relegation season, when Pardew left for Crystal Palace, I mean, I was actually very worried for the Newcastle match, and I don't think they were doing too well at that point. And then again, neither were we. But it's just a history. Even in the championship winning season, we had that as well. So no, not a good omen when you guys are just dropping like flies. Your manager's just left, and your owners left you up a creek, and all sorts of turmoil going on at Hull. I mean, it just seems like the scene is set for an over against the odds victory for Hull. But barring that, I hope we're still trying to find our groove. In all honesty, I actually think you guys will be in for the first hour or so, but once Musa comes on, I think it will be a bit of a different story, in all honesty. So,
yep.
So I'm tipping. Oh heck! I think we'll go 3-0 for this one.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you. I can't really see anything pointing in our favour, but who knows? It's always interesting once the whistle goes, and we'll see how it pans out. I'll ask you one final question, which is just who do you think will be your player of the season? Who do you think will impress the most? I mean, obviously Vardy and Mahrez had outstanding seasons last year. Do you think either of them can back it up, or do you think it'll be a new boy like Mendy or Musa who might steal the show?
Oh, good question. Player of the season. If Leicester is to have a good season, I think. Well, if Musa starts firing, I think Vardy and Musa might cancel each other out. In all honesty, out of the new boys, I can't honestly see. I can't see Mendy or any of the others getting it. I'll go. Oh heck! I'll go. I'll go with Mahrez to back. I'll go with Mahrez to back it up because, well, creative flair, and he does break the defenses down. Where, well, considering if the opposition's learnt anything from last season, they're going to try those tactics, especially if Vardy and Musa are together. And well, we need someone to break them down, and I think that's where Mahrez is going to come in and just break it down and continue our streak. We'll continue our good streak, I suppose.
Well, if the streak continues, it'll be certainly great to watch, especially with Champions League football as well. I mean, it was a fairy tale run to the title last season, but it continues this season with Champions League football as well. So we'll look forward to it with great interest. Thank you very much for joining me, Fryer Tuck.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll catch you next time.
Yep.
So we just heard from Fryer Tuck about the Leicester game to open the season against Hull City. So I'll open it to you guys as well. Opening game of the season, 9:30 tonight on SBS as well, free to air. So it's going to be very easy for everyone to watch here in Australia. How do you guys see this game panning out? Obviously, Hull have one fit centre back, so Jake Livermore's going to drop back there to partner Curtis Davies against Jamie Vardy and potentially Musa as well. Is there any chance that Hull can spring some sort of upset?
I think in the Premier League there's always a chance, but this one's very low. I think Leicester should comfortably win.
Is Hernandez playing?
Yeah, he will. So, I mean, that's the only positive element I can kind of take from our pre-season is that he's scored 4 goals in 4 games against some pretty handy opposition in sides like Torino. So if he can continue to score goals even with the lack of players, that's the only chance I really give us.
Who are you going to play in goal, by the way?
Jakupovic.
Can you give me some background on who that is?
So if you remember last season in the FA Cup, we went to the Emirates against Arsenal, and he made about 16 saves or something like that, and gave us a clean sheet against Arsenal for the first time in about 100 years. And he was also the keeper that played in our playoff campaign because McGregor had back issues at that point, which have carried on into this pre-season. But he's actually the longest serving player at the club because he was the first player Steve Bruce signed when he arrived at the club, and he's been mainly a cup player for us, but he's had a few chances in the league. If you think McGregor makes a few howlers, then you haven't seen Jakupovic yet, because in one of his first games against Sheffield Wednesday back in the Championship, he basically dropped the ball over the line and then feigned a head injury so that he could get subbed off because he was so embarrassed with what had happened. And it's taken a while for him to live that down.
So yeah, it's looking really promising for you, mate.
Yeah. What's your score predictions, guys?
Yeah, I actually think it might be closer than people think, and the reason for that is I think Mike Phelan knows that you're not going to really be able to compete with Leicester, and if you come out, you're going to get absolutely destroyed with Jake Livermore at the back on the counter-attack. So I think you'll sit deep and you'll put pretty much everyone behind the ball, keep Hernandez up top, and hope to steal a 1-0. but I think you might go down 2-1.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Maybe 2-0
Yeah.
Leicester.
Yeah, I'm thinking something similar to that. I think the way we've been lining up in pre-season, we've played a 4-3-3, but we've basically had the two wide frontmen dropping back to make a five-man midfield when we're defending. So I think we're sort of preparing for a pretty defensive performance against Leicester, where we can hope to get them on the counter, which would be a bit ironic given how they played last season. But yeah, I think maybe a 2-1 or 2-0 to Leicester is probably the most likely result. Then we've got Crystal Palace against West Brom, which is a pretty underwhelming sort of game, I suppose. It's the Pulis Classic. It's two teams he's managed. Do we see it being anything other than 0-0?
Probably not. Just now that Aston Villa are gone, I think West Brom now take the title of most irrelevant team in the league. Am I right in saying that?
Oh, I would think so. It's interesting, I mean, with their new Chinese owners, whether or not they become a bit more relevant, whether they try and show a bit of ambition to sign some decent players and play some decent football. But from what I've seen or heard, they've had a pretty underwhelming pre-season, so it wouldn't be the start to the season that their fans would have been hoping for.
I fancy Palace in this game. I think they've brought in Andros Townsend. It will be a decent signing for him. Although it looks like Balassi might be on his way out pretty soon for £30 million. I mean, who's delighted with that? They still need that top quality striker. You could almost say that this is the Berahino Cup, considering that they're trying to get Berahino off West Brom, Palace, and they need someone like that desperately. But I see Palace just having enough, so I'll go for 2-1.
Yeah, I'm thinking it'll be a draw. It might be 0-0 or 1-1, but it's going to be a pretty tight game, I think. Burnley at home to Swansea could be an interesting one, given how Swansea's loaned out Gomez to France, and they've sold Ayew to West Ham, but they've managed to get in a couple of players as well. It could be an interesting game for for Burnley at home, and a good chance for them to start off with a win. Do we see this one as perhaps it's a pretty 50-50 game, I would think?
50-50 in the way it's going to be horribly boring.
Well, yeah, either side, it's a pretty decent chance to get the win, I would think.
Oh, I don't think either side are a chance to win. I think this has got 0-0 written all over it, and both these teams are going down.
What about you, Loonerty?
Yeah, Swansea they've dropped off a fair bit. And maybe there's a bit of the first game back in the top flight. So maybe Burnley will pick up the win.
Yeah, I mean, I could see Andre Gray maybe getting a 1-0 victory for Burnley, because he's looked pretty promising last season in the Championship and again over the pre-season. So I'd keep an eye on him and see how he goes in this one, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him on the score sheet. Everton against Tottenham promises to be a pretty big game for the opening weekend, because obviously Everton would want to start to see some improvement under Koeman. Whether that's immediate or not might not be the case, but Tottenham as well had a pretty slow start to last season and would want to hit the ground running. And I saw an interesting stat that apparently Tottenham are the side to have lost the most opening day fixtures in the Premier League. So they'd want to be writing that statistic against Everton. How do we see this one panning out, Bojan?
You pretty much ruined my prediction by saying all that stuff. So I was about to say that Spurs always start slowly. Everton are going to be really defensively solid now that they've gotten rid of John Stones and brought in a quality defender like Ashley Williams. So I can see Everton winning this 2-0.
How about you, Loonerty?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Everton get the win. I think Koeman will improve them a fair bit, although they haven't been super active. They've got Williams in, which is good. Yeah, I still think Tottenham will win, though. Just quality in the end.
Yeah, I get the feeling that Tottenham might actually have the edge in this one because I think they will be quite mindful of starting the season a bit better than they did last year. But it'll definitely be an interesting game to watch because it's another one that could really go either way and should be quite an interesting one to keep an eye on. Middlesbrough at home to Stoke will be another game like with Burnley where a promoted club will be pretty hopeful of getting 3 points to start the season. Stoke haven't really brought that many players in over the off-season, whereas Borough have been pretty active strengthening for the Premier League. They've brought in your man Valdez, Bojan. What do you make of their off-season, and do you see them as a decent chance in this one?
Borough?
Yeah.
Mate, their best signing by a mile is Victor Fisher. If he can stay fit, he will bang goals and create plenty for Madredo and Jordan Rhodes. So he's a man to watch out for. He's a young kid. He's a former wonder kid, really, that unfortunately has been hampered by ankle injuries for the last season and a half. But if he can come good for them, he might be enough to keep them up, to be honest. And they brought in, not only they brought in Victor Valdez, they brought in Bojan, so they've got plenty of keepers, and they brought in Andreas Pereira today as well.
Oh, I missed that one.
Yeah, to bolster that midfield.
That'll be a good one.
Yes, but I'm not sure how they're going to go against Stoke, given, whilst they haven't maybe improved on paper, they've got, I guess, they've had more time with guys like Imbula in the team, and that front three that they've got at Stoke, I think might be too much for Borough's defence.
And then obviously the link between both your sides and Borough is Aitor Karanka, who served as Mourinho's assistant at Real Madrid. And he said that he won't be getting in touch with Mourinho for advice ahead of his Premier League debut. But Loonerty, obviously, when Mourinho was at Chelsea, I think you loaned out a few players to Borough when they were in the Championship. Yeah. How do you see them performing in the Premier League?
Yeah, I think we loaned them Bamford at one point and Callas as well.
Where's Callas these days?
I'm actually not sure. I think he's been loaned. I think he got loaned to somewhere in Germany. Hang on,
okay, one of the German clubs, I suppose.
I think it was one of the lower.
No.
It might have been. Oh no, there we go. Thomas Callas sent on loan to Fulham.
Oh,
so that's not in Germany at all. That may have been last season that I'm thinking of. I lost my place. What were we talking about?
How do you reckon Borough will go against Stoke?
Yeah. I agree with Bojan. I think Stoke will still will pick up the win. I don't think I'm not too excited about this game, to be honest.
Well, we've also got Southampton up against Watford, with Southampton yet again debuting a new manager in the Premier League, and you have to wonder how many personnel they can lose over the seasons and still maintain that sort of form that they've shown up the top of the table. Southampton at home, Watford really needing something out of this game, given they've got some pretty tough fixtures after this. I think they play Chelsea, United, and a couple of other bigger clubs as well. Do we see Watford getting something out of this, or do we think Southampton's too strong? I'll start with you, Loonerty.
So who did Southampton bring in as manager?
Is it Claude?
Pure.
Oh, Pure, sorry.
Yeah, Claude Pure.
Yeah, Claude Pure. There you go. We're both right. Yeah.
It's gonna be very interesting to have two new managers going off in the very first game. I think Southampton do have the quality there, but Watford did very well. Like, it surprised most people, I would say, last season with how well they did. I'm not certain how much of that was Flores as coach, but I'd probably go with Southampton picking up the win, or maybe even a draw here.
How about you, Bojan?
I think Southampton might struggle to score, to be honest, losing their best striker and best midfielder in the same summer, not really replacing them is probably not the greatest look. In Graziano Pella and Sadio Mane. So I think Aristotle, Claude Puel, he's got a pretty good reputation in France. So I think they'll probably finish about 10th this year. I don't think that they'll be too flash. Watford, I'm really disappointed in them getting rid of Tito Sanchez Flores because I was pretty dewy about how well he was doing last year and how much I liked him. Walter Mazzarri is an absolute shit truck. That bloke is a disaster. He could send them down on his own. I'm telling you, they will implode under him.
Is it
But
is it just me? Because I only saw him for the first time this morning when I was watching the previews for the season. Is it just me, or does he look a bit like an Italian Alec Baldwin?
he does. He does. He
Oh, yeah,
does
you're
without,
right.
without the ability. Yeah. But Watford did just re-sign, thankfully for them, Odin Igalo to a big 5-year deal. I think it was, and hopefully they play like a Flores team rather than a Mazzarri team early in the season, and I can see them winning 2-0.
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably.
Just quickly.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
No, you go.
I was just wondering, did Watford sack Flores, or did he just leave?
I think they sacked him. I think they. I don't know what the reasoning was.
He was there on a 1-year deal, and I think they failed to renew his contract.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't understand what they were
You would have.
expecting out of him. What didn't they finish like 12th or something?
12th, and then they made
Yeah,
was it an FA Cup semi-final or quarter-final?
They got semi-final, yeah.
And you know who's going to be like a massive loss for them this year? Nathan Aki. They let him.
Yeah.
He's
He's
like
gone to Bournemouth,
somewhere
hasn't
else.
he?
Bournemouth, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how they let him go. He was one of their best players last year, and in fact, to be honest, Looney, he's probably be at Chelsea this year.
Oh,
Given your defence.
that's one of the things that is very frustrating about that is that we should have kept him.
He's
And
good.
it would have been good. He is. It would have been good to have Christensen back as well, but we sent him on a 2-year loan, so he's still at Mönchengladbach.
We'll take him off your hands if you want.
Well, another team with 2 new managers is Manchester City against Sunderland. It'll be Guardiola's first match in the Premier League. And City do seem to start seasons with pretty big wins. I think they've had a few 4-0 wins on opening days in the last few seasons against Newcastle, Swansea, sides like that. We'll touch on Sunderland first, obviously, with David Moyes being appointed as Allardyce's successor. How do we see him going with Sunderland?
I think he'll do well. I don't think we should judge him on this weekend's result as to how he's going to go.
Yeah.
It might not be too pretty given their side. But look, he took over Everton, and Everton were arguably in a worse situation. And he got them multiple Europa League campaigns, and one. He got them into 4th place one year and a Champions League qualifier that they were very unlucky to lose. So he's got the ability to work on shoestring budgets in the Premier League. His teams are difficult to beat generally unless he's managing a top 4 team, then they're very easy to beat. And his transfer window activity has been interesting. I like the addition of I like the addition for player and for both the 2 clubs of Januzaj from United. If he can get him back to the form that he showed under Moyes in the first place, he could keep them up almost on his own. He's a very talented player. He's just got nothing between his ears at the moment, and he needs a good kick up the arse. And hopefully, going to Sunderland provides that for him. Paddy McNair, long term, will prove to be a decent signing at centre half for them. I'm not sure any of their other signings will work out, but I think we all know that Sunderland's goal every year is to stay in the Prem, and I think he'll achieve that.
Loonerty, do you see this as a stuffing for Man City? Do we see it being a big score?
Yeah, I can definitely see it being a big win for City. But I do agree that I think Moyes will do well at Sunderland over the season. And it's just unfortunate that his very first game back, he's going to be playing City.
Yeah, I can probably see a 3-0 or maybe even a 4-0 for Man City in that one. Next up is Bournemouth up against Man United, and it was interesting this fixture last year. I think Bournemouth actually got the win against you guys, Bojan, with De Gea dropping a ball into the goal straight from across for one of them. Do we see United getting off to a good start under Mourinho and battering Bournemouth away from home, or is it going to be sort of a little while longer before the attacking players that have been brought in start to gel?
I think we'll have a better start to the season than your boys. But
Oh,
no, look, I'm actually really disappointed that the FA brought in this rule where you can get banned in one country and it translates to a new country. So Paul Pogba got 2 bookings across the course of the Italian version of the FA Cup. And because he got 2 bookings in a cup competition last year, they've banned him from the first Premier League game. Absolutely ridiculous.
Is Pogba the first player or only player so far to have been affected by that? Is it a new rule?
I think there are 3 players who are, but certainly none as
Yeah,
none as important
yeah.
as Paul Pogba. But look, I think we'll definitely have enough in this game. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the new signings gel, and I can see us winning this game relatively comfortably. Let's call it 3-0.
What's your take on this one, Loonerty? Do you see a comfortable win for United?
Yeah. I think it'll probably at least 2-0 for United.
Yeah, I think I'm probably in the same boat, probably 2 or 3-0 for United. Sunday night, there's a couple of interesting games. First of them being Arsenal up against Liverpool. Arsenal, pretty similar situation to Hull at the moment in terms of fit centre backs. I think they've got Callum Chambers and their new signing from Bolton in Holding, who'll be the only fit centre backs, unless I'm mistaken. So that'll be an interesting one for them up against Liverpool. At the Emirates, where Liverpool don't seem to have a very good record, but do we reckon Liverpool a pretty decent chance for this one?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I'd say that. What the hell is going on with Arsene Wenger and Ivan Gazidis and Stan Kroenke? I mean, seriously, just open up the checkbook. You're making over probably between 150 and 200 million pounds this season with the TV deals and your commercial sponsorships. You're haggling over a couple £1 million for Mustafi. And Mustafi's not a world-class defender. He's a good defender, but he's not a world-class defender. But look, you guys need someone. Arsenal needs someone desperately. And I can already see it. What's going to happen, mate? What's going to happen is Liverpool are going to turn up. They're going to absolutely batter Arsenal. I'm tipping 3-4-1. They're going to batter them. The fans are going to absolutely melt down on. I mean, Arsenal fan TV. Tune into that early, boys. It'll be glorious. And then Wenger will be sprung into action, and he'll magically buy a centre half. So the writing's on the wall totally. He's such a bloody tight ass, and he needs a decent kick up the arse to do anything that bloke.
How do you see it, Leonard? Do you see it as similar to what Bojan thinks?
Yeah, very much so. Just got to remember about that net spend, though. Very important.
They win that every year.
The interesting thing, though, well, hey, hang on. I think we're doing all right with it this year. We're 4.5 million in sales with nil on the spending.
Top 4, mate. Top 4, you are.
Yeah, not doing too badly on that one. It's interesting though, because you think their centre backs are so sparse at the moment, but you also get the sense that maybe that somehow Arsenal seem to sort of cling on and kind of make it up as they go along in terms of players, where they might not have the fit players and they might end up playing Sanchez as a striker or something like that, but they might end up still performing quite well at home. It depends on the Liverpool side that turn up, because I mean Liverpool at some points last season were battering sides, and at other times barely seemed to be able to string passes together and attack with any sort of fluidity. So it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. I do tend to agree. I think Liverpool end up smashing Arsenal, but it could be a decently high-scoring game, that one. The last game to look at is obviously Chelsea up against West Ham at home. West Ham, I think, did they do the double over you last season, Loonerty?
I think they did, or maybe the one at Stamford Bridge may have been a draw.
Might have been a draw. How do you see this one panning out? Obviously, Bilic still at West Ham, so they've got that sort of continuity. Chelsea with a new manager. Do you see this being a danger game?
Yeah, for sure. It'll be really important to kick off with a win under Conte at Stamford Bridge. But West Ham were really good last season. I think Payet tore us a new one, at least at Upton Park. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes again. And I don't know. I'm just really not confident in our defense at the moment. So I think it's going to be a case of we have to score more than they can score against us, rather than defending them as much.
How do you see it, Bojan?
Look, I think that Chelsea might start the season slowly and they might struggle to score early. I might be proven completely wrong by that. But I don't think Payet's pretty much had a pre-season at all. He definitely didn't play in those Europa League ties, so they've just come back from the Euros. I don't know what part he's played in pre-season, but probably not enough to have the same impact he did last year from the start. So I'm definitely looking at a draw for this game, probably 1-1.
And just on one of your new signings, who I haven't really touched on yet, in Batshuayi, how do you see him going, Loonerty? Do you see him being a promising addition who might be able to light up the Premier League this season, or is he more one for the long term?
I think he's more for the long term, but he's looked all right in pre-season. I think it was a mistake. We sent Traore out on loan, and he's been fantastic in pre-season. So it's a bit frustrating that we've let him go when he would have been a perfect backup for Costa. But I think the case will go that Batman will be back up to Costa with Remy playing if Conte remembers that he exists. I think he'll do okay, but I don't think he's going to set the world on fire.
Well, it's going to be a very interesting weekend of fixtures, as the first weekend of the Premier League always is. New managers at a number of clubs, promoted clubs hoping to get off to a good start, and top four clubs hoping to get on a roll to start their title challenge. So it's going to be a really interesting set of games to look forward to tonight. So thank you both for coming on to chat about them.
No worries.
Yeah, to Zlatan.
And thank you everyone for listening in. Until this time next week, we'll see you on the forums.